Welcome into another edition of the FutureSox Roundup. My name is Elijah Evans with my co-host Jeff Cohen. We are joined today by my friend and coworker boss Aram Leighton of Just Baseball, who runs the amazing prospect content, all the content, podcast, everything for Just Baseball, which recently put out the updated top 100 prospects list. So we are lucky enough to be joined by Aram today to talk about the top 100, the White Sox farm system, potential trades coming up, and everything in between. Welcome in, Aram. Appreciate you coming.
Thanks for having me. Great timing, like you said. Obviously, writing about a lot more White Sox prospects these days with how loaded the farm system's getting, and it sounds like it's only the beginning. I think it's going to be a lot stronger soon, so plenty of names to talk about.
Yeah, we're definitely feeling the same way. We're fired up right now. You know, every week we talk about prospects here with Jeff and I. We go through kind of the farm system and talk about guys that are performing. And we find ourselves every week right now, like there's a lot of guys performing. This is not what it was when we started doing this, last year, a year and a half ago, right? Like every single week, there's guys where we're like, this guy looks great. And that is something we're not used to. And it's something that makes it a lot more bearable when you have the worst team in Major League Baseball as well. So we're pumped. We're excited for the future. Your top 100 came out on Monday, this past Monday, the 3rd, and 5 White Sox in the top 66 prospects. I know you've kind of already been higher than the consensus on a few of the guys in the White Sox system, particularly Drew Thorpe, Jairo Iriarte, and Edgar Quero. You've been a little bit ahead of the trend on those guys already, but Noah Schultz made a big jump. That was one thing I noticed because I know we talked about it preseason. Like, yes, he's great, but he needs to throw innings and he needs to continue to rise to the system and he needs to just get healthy innings under his belt. What so far this season has led you to putting Noah Schultz all the way up at 32? And can he keep rising from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the conversation that we had earlier this year, and really it was more of just we've seen what Schultz can do, and we've seen how talented he is, but it's hard to rank a guy in the top 50 when, we have not really seen him throw much more than, 30, 40 innings, whatever it was at the end of last year. So I wanted to just see a little bit more. And while they're still being careful with him, and understandably so, we now have double the sample, double the sample size of him succeeding against now more challenging competition in high A and then double A, and just continuing to see it roll, but also just seeing a little bit more of the pitchability as well. I mean, you see the way that he's able to dominate with the fastball in the mid-90s and running it up even higher than that. But then you have the slider command, I think, is what really has just been jarring in a positive way, like where it's just, how does a 6'9" lefty at 20 years old land his slider for a strike at a 72% clip and with ease, and repeat the mechanics? I mean, the athleticism for a guy of his stature and limited experience is pretty remarkable. So you start dreaming on the projection there too. But I think really for the most part, it's just seeing him do it again now, and seeing him continue to build on that and just become, like, slowly but surely a more complete pitcher. I feel like you're looking at a guy here that, when you talk about upside, how can you dream on much more than a 6'9" lefty who repeats his mechanics well, fills up the zone, and is also mixed in like a cutter variation? The only thing that's really missing for him is consistent feel for the changeup, but even that pitch has flashed a little bit. So, I mean, it's really hard to poke a hole in Schultz right now other than the workload. And, I mean, we've got a lot of top prospects that are being treated very carefully, and Schultz is no different than all of those guys, and we're slowly seeing him start to take on a little bit more of a workload. So I think it's really easy to get excited about a guy like Schultz.
Jeff, have you noticed that slider command? Because that's something I noticed. I know you got to see him in Winston in person this year. Is that something you kind of noticed? Because I've picked up on that just watching him, that the slider command is stronger, and then the pairing with the cutter as well.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that 72% stat. That's phenomenal. I've seen him pitch a few times, and I keep telling Elijah that it's the prettiest slider that I've seen in the minor leagues so far this year. But so what is it? Put that 72% number in perspective for me. Like, what would be average, and how many guys are higher than that?
That's a great question. I mean, generally speaking, I think most guys, especially at the lower levels, are going to be hovering around, and I'd say average like 63, 64% strike rate on that slider. Then you factor in that it's Noah Schultz who throws hard and is 6'9", and players of like his archetype, pitchers of his archetype, I would venture to say that they're usually below 60% and trying to work on that and trying to find that. So to have that kind of length, to have that delivery and still be able to locate it that way, and you mentioned it too, like it's got a lot of movement. So to have that much horizontal movement and still be able to consistently locate it, I think it's pretty rare. But to answer the question directly, I'd say low to mid 60s. But then when you
Wow.
again look at the archetype of Noah Schultz, it'd be even lower than that for most
Yeah.
players that are, which is very few, small bucket of players, but that are of his archetype pitching wise.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive stuff. Like we harp about it every single week. Like this guy's doing stuff that just is unbelievable. The last question on Schultz here, like 32 right now in your top 100. If he is to keep this level up, let's say he can get to right now, he's making 4 innings a start. Like they're pretty much capping him at 4 innings. He hasn't gone above 4 innings at all. He hasn't come back out for the 5th once this season. At the end of the season, let's say he's making 5 inning starts and he's pitching at the same level right now. Top 20? What are we thinking there?
I mean, it's pretty hard to say that he would be anywhere below that because you look at kind of some of the graduations, but just comparing him to his peers, right? You look at the pitching prospects across the board. Most of the guys that are ahead of him because they've either done it at the big league level for a cameo, like a Christian Scott, or they've been just doing it for such a large workload that, you can feel pretty confident in just what they've been able to show on every 5th day at the AA or AAA level. But when it comes to lower level pitchers, I mean, I don't think there's anybody ranked higher than him at this point. So if he's doing that, and now he's in AA, of course, so he's doing it at the AA level, I think very easily he's within the top 20. And the other part that kind of had him just a little bit lower last year was you had that slight elbow flare up, and I was a little bit nervous just to see how that was going to go and see if he was going to be able to come back from that and look the same. And, talking to him in spring training made me feel a lot better and kind of understanding that it was more precautionary and they just wanted to be ahead of it. And then just seeing him come back out this year and look totally, unfazed as if it never happened, that really helped. But, you see young, tall, left-handed pitcher with some elbow issues right out of the gate, and you get a little bit concerned, but he's done a great job of, putting that to bed, and I think done a good job of getting his body in a spot to where he can handle a little bit more of a workload this year, despite the flare-up last year.
Definitely. We're pumped to see where it can go from him, and we think he's just going to keep rising. When we go to the next 2 pitchers in this system, right, we've talked a lot about how this system is getting deeper with arms, and it continues to get, stronger and stronger, right? The 2 guys added this offseason in terms of the big-time arms were Drew Thorpe and Jairo Iriarte. You have been the high man on Iriarte for a while, I think. I mean, I think you had him on your top 100 last year, and I remember coming into the Cease trade, like most people didn't see him as top 100. They were like, oh, this is kind of disappointing for the second piece in a mega deal for Dylan Cease, right? That was the reaction from a lot of White Sox fans. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I know you were super high on him, and I had watched some of his videos of just the fastball slider pairing, and it got me excited. And he looks great right now. Like the ERA might not be, as amazing as a Thorpe right now, obviously, but kind of how do these 2 separate themselves, and where do you see the difference between them only being, 10 spots apart on the top 100 right now?
That's the irony and the funny part in these prospect rankings is like, Jack McMullen always call him and we'll have a player ranked 39th and a player ranked 40th, and one's a catcher, in low A and another is a triple A pitcher. And I'm like, why do I have to compare these 2 guys in this ranking? And I think Iriarte versus Thorpe is like almost a smaller version of that, where these guys as pitchers couldn't be more different, and that not in a negative way. It's just you got a guy that operates, more 90 to 92 with an unbelievable changeup and superb command, and then Jairo Iriarte, you have a guy that has in the past worked more in the mid to upper 90s. His fastball was averaging like 96 last year, a little bit diminished this year, but disgusting stuff. Slider is diabolical, and the command is a little bit of the question, but it's a floor versus ceiling, and then kind of balancing the 2 things kind of conversation here. And I think when you look at Thorpe, you just look at that fastball. The characteristics really help too, where he gets above average ride to make that low 90s play. And then it's an 80 grade changeup. And then that's the only 80 grade changeup that we have on the list. And I don't know if since we've started just baseball, if I've put an 80 on a changeup. Like the numbers on that pitch are absolutely outrageous. So when you have plus command and the fastball changeup combination, you're going to be in a great spot. But I think the most underrated part of Thorpe, and I think you got to probably give the Yankees credit for this because they've done a really good job with developing their pitchers, especially with the cutters and sometimes finding the right breaking balls for them. The breaking balls in the cutter for him, like he has a complete arsenal. Like, yes, it's fastball changeup, but he can mix in a curveball, a cutter, a slider, and all of those pitches have been really effective for him at each level as he mixes those in, and he always has that changeup as like the get out of jail free card. Since the beginning of last year, I'm pretty sure opponents are hitting about a $130 against his changeup. I mean, that's remarkable stuff. And we saw Thorpe do it, at the big league against big league hitters in spring training, right on right, and make guys like Willie Adames, Rhys Hoskins look foolish on that changeup. So, I mean, the floor is what really holds him up there. But a guy like Iriarte closed the gap for me because if it all clicks for him, I mean, you're looking at a guy that has like number 2 stuff. The fastball characteristics are also absurd there too. And I think it's a testament to that when you see him dominating, or at least he's had starts this year where he's been as dominant as anybody, still at 93 to 95 because of those characteristics. It's a 5'2" release height, which is, like a half a foot lower than most, but gets crazy run and ride. And then you also pair that with the slider off of it. It's a nightmare for hitters. And you imagine he might tick back up as he gets back comfortable or whatever might be going on there. That fastball can play like a plus pitch. So the question with him is, he does have some of that command question. He's been walking guys at about a 10 to 12% clip over the last couple of years, but he still gets outs. And I think if there's a guy, I mean, you guys saw it, like, not comparing him to Dylan Cease, but when you have ridiculous stuff, the scale slides and you can get away with a little bit more of a walk rate and a little bit fringier command. I think Iriarte can get away with that if the command can get a little bit better. But just because of the upside, that's what made them somewhat close. And I think maybe closer than others may imagine, because that fastball slider alone, that combination is going to make him a good big league arm. And I think still we're seeing a lot of guys at the big league level succeed as starters with those 2 pitches if they're both plus or plus. And I think both have flashed plus for Iriarte.
While we're talking about high upside pitchers, the guy I think might be number 3 in the system is Grant Taylor. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, and this is why I love keeping up with folks like you guys, because I always say, like, the team prospect coverage is always the most in depth, and you guys will clue me in on players. And Taylor was someone that I saw you guys talking about a little bit, and I'd been excited to just dive into what he had been doing. And I was floored when I saw this stuff, because sometimes when we cover one specific farm system at the same time, we get excited right away. So I was like, ooh, they're talking about Grant Taylor a lot. Like, let's go see what he's doing. And I was floored by the pitch characteristics and the stuff as well. Like, I can totally understand why White Sox fans are really excited about him. And I think you're right, Jeff. Like, this is a guy that could easily jump right into that conversation. The extension that he's able to get on his fastball as well. He's 6'3", 230, big guy, but he gets over 7 feet of extension, so that's already getting on guys quicker, and he works down on the mound really well, so I think that allows the fastball to play really well at the top of the zone. And then he's got that cutter slider variation as well, where he's able to manipulate between the two and keep hitters really uncomfortable and mix in the curveball. But the thing that might be the most shocking for me is the command, too. I mean, we're looking at a guy that with that stuff is really filling up the zone, overall strike rate of 70%. So I'm with you. I think he's got major upside, and it seems like the White Sox now have another one in there where, I mean, when they're on, like, there's certain guys in the White Sox system where when they're on, I mean, it's 10 plus Ks, and I think Taylor is cut from that cloth as well.
Yeah, and what's interesting with Taylor, like you mentioned with the command, right? Like, this is a guy coming off TJ. I don't think it can't be understated, right? Like, we've seen with the White Sox especially, we've seen guys like Peyton Pallette, Tanner McDougal, some other guys that are, high-level prospects coming off TJ and really struggling with the command. Mm-hmm. The stuff might be there, but the command hasn't been, at least for a year or two. This is Taylor's first 3 professional starts, and he has 19 strikeouts and 1 walk. Like, this isn't like, oh, he can command a little bit. Like, he's coming off a TJ and already has really good command of impressive stuff, right? Like, it's advanced and it's gonna get better. Like, we knew he was a potential first rounder coming out of LSU before the injury, right? Like, he was in a rotation that was supposed to be, he was supposed to be the guy right behind Paul Skeens, right? Like, this is a guy that is elite, and we know he can be, right? But seeing it this immediately coming off his injury is really encouraging for what the future holds for him.
I agree 100%. And honestly, to the point of the Tommy John thing, and a lot of guys will say sometimes they don't feel like themselves until 2 years after to really get their body back and have that feel for their body again. If Grant Taylor was throwing bullpens with these strike rates and these characteristics, I would have been impressed in a vacuum with that alone coming off of TJ. So, and I'm saying that because people might say, oh, college arm and low A. I don't care what the competition is, especially when you're looking at a pitcher like this. Like, what he is doing would play at any level right now, and hopefully he has the same level of confidence. I think he will, looking at the way that he's been attacking hitters, to where they can push him pretty quickly. But I mean, it's just been very clear that he is on a different level than the low A competition, and that his stuff is ready for upper level competition as well. And when you're getting 17 to 18 inches of carry from a below average release height, and the way that he works down the mound with that extension, very easy to look at that fastball and say that's a plus or better heater. And he might have more velocity come back to him now as he continues to get innings under his belt. And the fact that he's averaging 96 so far this year, if he gains another half tick even, or a tick, that might be a double plus heater. So
Yeah.
he's in a really good spot. And I think again, this is why I love the team specific farm system coverage, because not a lot of people are giving Grant Taylor coverage. And I mean, if this guy was doing this in the Yankee system or maybe the Dodger system, I think we would hear a lot more about him, because it is pretty remarkable stuff-wise. Like that, this was one of the more pleasant surprises when I jumped into it, to be honest.
100%. You're totally right. And we saw him already flash 98 too. That's what's crazy. Like he's sitting 96 and flashing 98. Like if he's flashing 100 and sitting 97, that's you're looking at a top-notch heater at that point, right? The next guy I want to mention to you is someone else that we kind of a lot of White Sox fans. I saw this under your comments of the top 100 from a few different people. The guy picked right before Grant Taylor, Jacob Gonzalez, right? Like we've talked about this a lot. We don't need to go into it in depth, right? But like he struggled last year. His first professional season, he looked wrong. The swing was off. The timing wasn't there. He didn't look like the same hitter he was in college, right? Made a ton of adjustments this offseason. You and I have talked about it. He looks really good. He's already in Double-A now. He's doing well in Double-A. He's not looking overmatched at all. He's hitting 2 in that loaded Barons lineup. He looks like a threat. He's kind of the on-base skills, the contact skills, the power is slowly starting to show a little bit more. How far out of the top 100 is Jacob Gonzalez, and is he a guy that could be on that list come next year?
Not far at all, and he absolutely is a guy that could be on that list. Honestly, it was just I wanted to see a little bit more just with the swing adjustments, and me, Elijah, like the one, there's nothing I love more than diving into hitters who have made changes and how those changes have helped them. And Jacob Gonzalez is one of the best examples in the minor leagues this year, I think, of a guy that entered pro ball with a swing that just wasn't going to play, and I think he found that out very quickly. And props to him to be willing to make that change immediately. A lot of people would say, hey, it was just my first pro season. I was tired from college. I'll get right next year. Comes back with the same swing, and now you're trying to find it in the middle of the season, and you almost have a lost year. It happens a lot. But we're seeing some guys, and I think Gonzalez, a big reason why teams liked him and the White Sox liked him was the makeup and the way that he goes about his business. And I think to see him make that change, I mean, the swing before, the setup put him in a really tough spot. He was very in his quads versus more into the backside. Now, it was really hard to control that lower half. You could see him really get drifty, and it would be hard to really have the best path and tap into power. It was affecting him in a lot of different ways. And I think just seeing what he has done now and then seeing the numbers to back it up, and just, I mean, you watch the two swings side by side, it's night and day, but then you look at the numbers, it's also night and day. The things that I want to see a little bit more of is just him doing that at the Double-A level, and I think he will. I to be honest, need to see a little bit more on the defensive side, just because that's more just I haven't had a chance to see as much of him at shortstop. But I think something that does get overlooked right now, and probably is overlooked with Gonzalez specifically, is like Double-A now, and I know he's only been there for about 20-something games, but yeah, it's impossible to slug there right now. And I'm like, that's the Edgar Quero conversation that we'll get into. I mean, it is dead ball central in the Southern League. I don't know why, what's going on. You could say that the numbers are down because of the Birmingham staff, but unfortunately you can't credit them for all of that. So there's some weird stuff going on there, and I think for the guys that are like average power guys, it's going to really rear its head for those types, because they all count the same. If you hit a ball 50 feet out versus you hit a ball 15 feet out, it's a home run. But if you hit a ball 15 feet out before and the balls are not carrying the same way, that's a fly out, versus the other guys are still going to get their home runs. So I've seen that a little bit. It's in Double-A, I think, with Gonzalez, and honestly, I think that's something that should have been considered a little bit more, but he's definitely right in the conversation there. I just want to see him do it, for probably at least like 30, 40 games in Double A, and then I think I could really start to feel excited about what he's doing, and feel excited about what he can bring to the table. I'm just worried that there's a little bit of a tweener aspect to him where the power is still, looking fringy at this point. The hit tool is good, but at shortstop, you're going to either want to be a plus hitter, or you're going to want to tap into at least average power, or do a little bit of everything across the board, which is very difficult to do. So I think he can do that, but I just want to see him stand out a little bit more on one aspect of the game, or show that glove can be above average at shortstop.
Yeah.
Well, that leads to another interesting question, and that's Colson Montgomery, because at some point, he's going to be in the big leagues, and hopefully Gonzalez will be in the big leagues. And are we talking about, second base, shortstop pairing, or does somebody slide over to third?
You got Ramos to consider too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really fun conversation because part of me has been a little bit frustrated with the way Montgomery will move at shortstop, but then other times, you'll see him make a play and look like he's comfortable at the position. I think he's going to get every single opportunity to play there, and I think he can get himself to be passable there. And if you look at the way that the infield kind of lines up, I feel like if Ramos is performing and he has his spot, he's obviously playing third. You look at what Gonzalez brings to the table in his skill set, it probably profiles best at second base, and that actually does take some pressure off the bat. And then if Montgomery is an offensive-driven shortstop, he still has the ability to make the plays that he needs to make. Does he grade out as a great shortstop? No, but I think if he continues to play out there and continues to work, and another guy make up, and there's a reason why they've been able to challenge him, and I think he's shown that he can continue to improve there. Even if he's a fringe average defender at shortstop, we've got guys like Bo Bichette out there playing shortstop every day, and when they're doing well, he's been a 4-win player every single season. So I don't see why Montgomery couldn't be, even a little bit better of a defensive version of that. Is he going to hit like Bo Bichette? You hope so. It's very lofty. But, I think there's been some precedent of guys that, can overcome the maybe lack of value defensively with the offensive ability. And I still think Colson probably profiles best at short. But I will say, like, if somebody else comes into the fold here that looks more like a true shortstop, and Bryan Ramos isn't really looking his part totally, Montgomery could slide over to third, and he could be a great defender there. And that's, again, not too much of a slight on Montgomery. I just really value the defense at shortstop. I always talk about it with the Reds and Elly De La Cruz. I've always wanted to see him kind of slide over to third. They're obviously not going to do that, but it is kind of that similar situation where I think Montgomery would be fine at short, and you're really just going to be happy about the offense. But if you do have another shortstop coming up that's really shorthanded and can play, you put him there. But Montgomery is kind of that face of the next phase, and you usually want those guys at shortstop. Whether teams want to admit the optics of it or not, look around, like the Elly De La Cruzes, the O'Neill Cruzes. Those guys should probably not be playing shortstop as much as they do, but they do.
There has to be that consideration there for optics, right? And then the other guy you just mentioned, Bryan Ramos, right? We got a little taste of him at the big league level, right? We got, he had a week of coming up, kind of like a little bit of a spark plug for the White Sox offense in early May when they were actually winning a few games here and there. And then, unfortunately, 1 week into his big league career, the promotion originally was probably rushed, right? Like, it was more of a 40-man decision than it was anything else. Like, there was a total mess on the 40-man. Gets promoted, looked decent though, didn't look overmatched at first. Gets hurt, comes back immediately, just 0 for 14, goes right back down to Charlotte. He probably belongs in Charlotte anyways right now. Like, we've been saying this all along. Like, he looks like he was ready to go up from Birmingham at the end of April into the beginning of May. He was getting hot. He was like, oh, this guy's turning around in Birmingham after a slow start. Gets to Chicago, right? And now he's back in Charlotte. What needs to happen for Ramos kind of to get back to Chicago later this season and really go into 2025 as a big league piece?
He's been a guy that I've just, and I know you've probably noticed it, like, I don't really know what to do with because, there's been stretches where a year and change ago, he was a top 100 prospect for us. I really liked what he's brought to the table. I love what he's done defensively and where he's gotten defensively to where I think he can play, a good third base. I think we see flashes where, he looks like a guy that can really mash. And then you see other flashes where it just seems like he's so rushed there. And I think the big thing that he needs to find is is how he can be ready for velocity. I think we've seen some adjustability. We've seen the ability to hit breaking balls, I think enough. But what stands out to me, and I know sliders have chewed him up this year, but, I think he's flashed that in the minor league level, and that can continue to improve. The one thing that's been consistent and been frustrating is the inability to be ready for velocity. And we've seen right-handed fastballs in particular chew him up. If you want to be a big league regular, you got to be able to hit fastballs. You got to be able to hit velocity. And it's weird because I look at the swing and I don't see egregious length. I don't see, slow bat speed. I think there's a lot of good components to it. So I don't know what he needs to do mechanically. I'd have to dive into it, but the answer is that he needs to find a way to be on time earlier and be ready for velocity, because dating back to the beginning of last year, this guy just continues to struggle against fastballs, and it's really hard to succeed that way as a hitter, and it's almost a testament to him that he put up fine numbers last year despite really rough statistics against fastballs, and I think that might be the most astounding part. Like, this guy hit 203 against four-seam fastballs last year, but he still finished 261 on the year overall, if you factor in the Arizona Fall League, and had a 787 OPS. So, if he can get himself to a point where he's ready at release, and ready a little bit earlier, I think that could make the world of a difference, and we could see him really start to break out.
Yeah. Oh, that's definitely accurate with him. That's going to be the next step for him as he keeps going. And, like you said, there's a world where the infield at some point next year is Ramos at third, Colson at short, and Gonzalez at second, right? That is the optimal situation, right? If things click, that's the dream, right? And they all have things to work on, but that would be the amazing outcome where you have, then next thing you know, you've got three infielders that are in their early 20s and they're all, starting for the White Sox in 2025, right?
I'd be watching a heck of a lot more White Sox games. Sorry, Jeff. I was just saying, I'll watch a lot of White Sox games if that's the infield. I don't care if they lose 130 games. I'd watch way more than I'd watch this team right now.
Totally agree.
I live in Charlotte, and I live actually just a few blocks from the Knight Stadium.
Ooh.
We're one promotion away from seeing that infield working together in the minor leagues, right?
Yep.
If
Yeah.
Gonzalez gets the bump, we've got them all in Charlotte.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's why I love these rebuild stretches here. And I know White Sox fans, the White Sox fans listening to this are understand it and are excited about it. But when you see these groups coming together and climbing up through the minor leagues together, I used to think a little bit I think fans kind of are we all want to pretend that they enjoy spending time together and they like climbing together. No, a lot of the time they really do. And the more players I've talked to about this, it is really valuable for them to make that climb together and be a group together. And I think for the promotion of minor league baseball too, the White Sox fans that are excited for the future, having that group in AAA in Charlotte, which by the way is also one of the best, AAA spots I think that you got, or minor league spots period. But just to have that excitement there and then have those guys potentially on a similar-ish timeline, I think it just has to be good for White Sox fans. It has to be good for that group of players, because let's be real. If the White Sox are going to be good in a few years, it's going to be because of most of those guys. Not all of those guys have to hit, but it's going to be because of those core of players doing well. But Jeff, I don't know if you're going to the park over the next couple of days, but the only thing I ask you root for is my buddy Griffin on the Jumbo Shrimp. But you can root for Charlotte for everybody else.
It's a great time down there in Charlotte. I got to go there a few years ago. It's a blast, and I'm excited to get out there and catch some games with Jeff in the near future. Two more things briefly here. The last thing in terms of just prospects, right? Is there anybody else we didn't mention? Because I know you're going to be getting to the White Sox top 15 at some point, and I've been going through and trying to start making my top 30 for the midseason, and it's hard. It's a more difficult situation to make a top 30 right now than it ever has been for the White Sox, because there's a lot of depth. Is there anybody else that is kind of on your radar that you're just kind of taking notice of, or you have your eye on within the farm system beyond all these top guys that we talked about?
Yeah, that's a great question, because, I think the White Sox are in an interesting spot where, because of the trades, they have a lot of guys and that are, we're very aware of, and the upper minors. And then, on the other side, you got some guys in the lower minors that maybe we just don't have as much, on and don't see as much of. And then there's not a ton in between. But I will say, no name and a trade guy, but I think kind of faded quickly because of the way he struggled last year is Jake Eder. And I think Jake Eder looks a lot more like Marlins Jake Eder this season. I don't think he's ever going to be a frontline guy, or he might not even be a middle rotation guy, but I do think that he could very well be a back end of the rotation starter and be a pretty good one at that. And, I think there was a point in time where people were kind of just writing him off because of the way that it looked after the trade last year. And I understand, the dichotomy of what Jake Berger was doing with the Marlins, and like, people get jaded from that, but like, you got to look at it in a vacuum here. And Jake Eder's a guy that, I think was pretty much auditioning every time he was pitching with the Marlins, knowing that with scouts there all the time. Gets traded, has a totally new situation, working with a new catcher, just going through all of that. Also another guy that was coming off of Tommy John and trying to get his footing back under him, 100%. But this is a guy that has one of the better, sliders that you're going to see. And that's a pitch that was dominating consistently at Double-A prior to Tommy John. And now we're seeing it dominate again. I mean, 34% chase rate, 21% whiff rate overall on that slider, and he's kind of made it more of like a harder cutter. And I think we're seeing that trend, I think, through the White Sox system where they want to kind of get those cutters involved with these guys. And I think for him it was more just of a manipulation of it, and then the changeup being in the fold there for him too. I think off of TJ, that was the one thing that he kind of lost the feel for. That pitch is back for him, and he's landing it for a strike 2/3 of the time. And I still think that the fastball could get back a little bit, and we talk about that 2-year mark, and he'll hit that around this season. He's sitting 92, 93 right now, but if he can get another tick, I'd feel really good about it. But regardless, I think that 3-pitch mix, and if the command continues to get better and get back to where it was before, I think this is a high probability back end of the rotation starter. And like, I know that doesn't sell tickets, and I know that doesn't make top prospect lists and get you super excited, but that's how you end up building sustainable success in a good ball club. And I think I don't think I have to convince White Sox fans, though, that pitching is important. So, I think it's just another guy to add to the fold that may get forgotten because, like you mentioned earlier, there's so many good arms right now. But he's a really intriguing, outside of Schultz, might be the most intriguing left-handed arm. So, it's always good to have.
Speaking of outside of Schultz, who has the second highest FIP in the entire organization right now? Jake Eder, believe it or not. Wow. Pretty crazy stuff there. So, I mean, it's impressive stuff. We've seen really good things from him. Another guy for you to keep on your radar. This is my little tidbit for you. Aldrin Batista, a single A guy, was an ACL acquired from the Dodgers last year for international money. A guy that me and Jeff keep talking about every week because Batista has some ridiculous movement on both his fastball and his slider for a 20-year-old. Really cool little name to keep on the radar there. But yeah, that's there's a lot of guys. There's a lot of depth. There's plenty of pitchers, especially, right?
Well, one other arm, and I know this is your guy, but I'll be honest, kind of just like, we'll see how he does. Kind of looks like a depth arm, and he probably still ultimately, like in the grand scheme, is. But I know your guy Mason Adams just continues to get outs, man. And I think we got a YouTube comment from a White Sox fan that was like, "You guys didn't talk about Mason Adams. Like your guy Elijah loves Mason Adams." And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right. I'll look into Mason Adams." And so when I looked into him, though, the thing that's really interesting is it's a kind of like short stride, like low 3/4 release. It's funky. It almost looks like he's playing catch sometimes, but from that release, like, gets crazy arm side run. And then the 2 breaking balls go in the other direction that he commands really well. A lot of contact on the ground, throw strikes. Like, again, not guys that you're going to get super excited about, but like, for me, if I were a general manager, these are the guys that I actually do get excited about because that's how you build that depth. And I think he's a guy that ultimately, can, eat innings and potentially be a back, 5 starter. If not, like, it's still a valuable guy that you can plug and play and get in there and be able to clean things up. So I think that's a guy that, I got to give you the credit on that one. But again, breaking balls between the two of them, 70% strike rate. Like, it's not that common, with these guys because it's hard to do, especially with the movement that a lot of these guys generate on their breaking balls.
Yeah, the floor, right? The high floor guys. It's exciting. It excites me. It might not excite everybody, but it excites me because I see a guy like Mason Adams and I'm like, this could be a big league pitcher, and it's a 13th round pick that you had no expectations for. Right?
They don't grow on trees.
Exactly. That's the thing you have to hit, and that's the part of this rebuild that, like, this White Sox rebuild will work if the acquisitions work, but also these draft picks, right? Like, these last 2 years of drafting look so much better already than the past decade of drafting in Chicago, right? So it's like that those guys need to hit. You need to hit on some late round picks to have sustainable organizational success, right? The last thing, I want to let you go soon. We really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. You guys on the Just Baseball show this morning, as we're recording here on Thursday, this will go out later this week, this following weekend, but you guys talked about Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet mock trades. The White Sox, like, right now as is, are already pushing the boundaries of a top 5 system in baseball with all these guys we just talked about. Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet, 2 years of control beyond this year for Crochet, 3 years of control beyond this year for Robert. Like, what are some players or teams? We'll start with teams. Like, who are the teams that can make these deals, and just how much can that kind of take the system to a whole nother level?
Yeah, so center field's an interesting spot because, you look at some of the best teams in baseball, usually they're going to have good center fielders, but it's such a thin position in Major League Baseball that I think there's a lot of teams that could just justify adding Luis Robert, even if they had a center fielder, either to move their current center fielder elsewhere or to have Robert play right and go be the best defensive right or left fielder in Major League Baseball where it's not even close. And I think for Robert, I don't know how he'd love that, but I think at the end of the day, if he gets a chance to go win ball games and play in a situation like that, I'm sure it would be fine for him, because that's where I look at Seattle, right? And Julio Rodriguez, and taking some of that pressure off of him and putting, somebody like Robert out there in that outfield to just be that partner with Julio Rodriguez, because I do feel like that team can get one-dimensional at times. But the team that I really like, that I just think could be such a good fit, is the Phillies. And the reason why I like it is no one's going to talk about them for Luis Robert. No one's really going to say too much about it, because that's how Dave Dombrowski likes it. But Dave Dombrowski is notorious for being aggressive and depleting farm systems, to be honest. But he also has 2 World Series titles to show for it. So he has not been that aggressive for his standards the last 2 years. The Phillies farm system has never been stronger, or not never been stronger, but in the Dombrowski era has not been stronger. It's been very weak for several years, and now, I think with good drafting and some development, they've got several prospects I really like. And yes, it would take most of their top guys, but the Phillies could pull it off. I think, of course, White Sox are going to ask for Andy Painter. I wouldn't be shocked if Dombrowski was willing to do it if they're the best team in baseball and they're desperate. But I still think that the Phillies could put together a really competitive package without Andrew Painter. When you look at what Aiden Miller's doing, it looks like one of the better young bats at the lower levels and is an absolute monster offensively. You look at a Starlin Caba, who's one of the best defensive shortstops at the complex, and I think at the lower levels, period, a switch hitter who's really talented. Justin Crawford, son of Carl Crawford, who, I think is close to the top 100 list for us, is on a lot of other top 100 lists, hits the ball really hard, can absolutely fly. It's just about elevating more. Like, those are all exciting pieces. McAble can get floated in there as well. And you look at the Phillies, I mean, center field's the only thing they're missing, I think, from being right on par with just about anybody in Major League Baseball. And I think they're already just about there anyway. So I think that's the underrated one, and I think that's a trade matchup that really works, because you mentioned wanting the bats. Phillies can get you 2 to 3 really exciting bats. And I think that's where it's like, the one guy they may not want to move is Andrew Painter. And that might be, the White Sox might be the one team that's willing to trade a star and say, you know what, you can have Painter. We want more bats then, like we were talking about earlier, because a package centered around Miller and Crawford and maybe even a Starlin Caba, I mean, those are 3 really, really good position players. But then, on the Crochet side, I think the package would be really, really competitive too. And I look right at, we've heard the Padres kind of floated in there. I think there's a lot of different teams, but the Orioles, I think we go right back to square one. John Means being out, and not really having that lefty that they can really trust. They just called up Cade Povich, who I like. He's, obviously a very good pitcher, but come on. We're talking about Garrett Crochet here, who's been one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. We're seeing power lefties take over the game between Tarek Skubal, even a Cole Reagans when he's hot. Like, we're seeing a lot of really, really talented power lefties. I feel like you could justify a big-time package, and the Orioles, I mean, they've got it, right? I mean, anything around a Kerstad, a Norby, like, we can just recycle those same names over and over again, but they can put something together really competitive. I think that would make a lot of sense for both parties.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. I want to get your take on it too, Jeff. But I think my initial thought there with the Orioles, my initial thought was they might prefer a Fetty, because they might want to go the safer route and a little bit more of a lower cost addition, because they continue to do this. But at the same time, like, what are you waiting on to spend? Like, we've seen Heston Kjerstad just destroy AAA all season. He has no spot in Baltimore. That is a headliner of a Crochet trade. Like, that's the dream situation for the White Sox, right? You get your right fielder of the future, who immediately plugs into the middle of the order for Chicago for the next 10 years, probably, right? It's a spot the White Sox haven't had for a long time. And then you get a chance on a Norby or, a Beavers, a guy that you like a lot, or you take a longer flyer on somebody like an Enrique Bradfield, who will be a little bit further down the road, right? It's like there's plenty of options there, but the Orioles just seem like too good of a fit for the White Sox for any of the pitchers, frankly, whether it's Crochet or you add in Kopech to a deal, right? Crochet and Kopech, or Fetty and Kopech, whatever it might be. Like, that just feels too like logical, right? And then on the Luis side, like I'm with you on the Phillies, man. We talked about it. Like I love Aiden Miller. I've been a huge fan on him since he was drafted. I wanted the White Sox to draft him last year in the first round, to be honest with you. And I think he's a great get. And then Crawford, Caba, those other names you mentioned, you don't need Painter to make that deal happen. And on the other side, I also think the Mariners make sense. Like you said with the J-Rod thing, they need offense, right? The Mariners look good. They look like they could win that division. They need another bat, and they need a big bat. And Luis Robert could be that bat for them in a system that has, 5 or 6 top 100 hitters, I think, right? Like all their top prospects are hitters, right? So like another fit where you've got a ton of hitting prospects that really fit what the White Sox need in a trade. Wow. Jeff, what's your initial reaction to that?
These two trades could just overhaul the non-pitching side of the White Sox farm system. We talk every week, Aram, about how deep the pitching is and how thin the bats are. But I got to say, even though this is a prospect show, I can't get past thinking about what Luis Robert would do in that Phillies lineup.
Oh my
God, what a lineup! Yeah. And you're right. If anyone would do that, it would be Dave Dombrowski, right? That's just classic move of his. So that's really interesting. And it's also, Elijah, that's an interesting idea that maybe the Orioles would rather have Fetty, which means, Crochet stays with the White Sox or gets flipped for some, to yet another team. I mean, wow.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like everybody needs pitching. Everybody's gonna need pitching. That's the trade deadline. That's the MLB right now, right? Like that's just baseball. So it's somebody's gonna pony up. And I think, Aram, would you say it's like, is this the right time to sell Crochet? Because I think it is, right?
I do, and look, it might be tough, to watch him go potentially compete for, the Cy Young next year, let's say, if it's all clicking. But he's under control for 2 more years. And then at that point, let's be honest, I think the White Sox will be in a great spot relative to where they're at now, and you'll see the direction. But where are the White Sox going to be in 2 years? Probably not in a position where you're saying, oh, let's extend Crochet and give him a huge contract and see where it goes from there. And then by the time Crochet by the time the White Sox are competitive, who knows if Crochet's still even pitching at that level. Whereas, I think you can get a guy that can really overhaul that farm. And you look at the talent that you have throughout the farm system pitching-wise as we continue to harp on, like, I think you can justify parting with Crochet. I still have a little bit of the concern of, like, can he handle 150, 180 innings a year? Is that going to work? And I think he can. I hope he can. But, I think if the White Sox hold on to him and he starts to slow down, you're really going to be kicking yourself because where you're at in this rebuild, that could be a guy that if you move right and hit on the trade, not only will set you up for sustainable success, can expedite this rebuild because pitchers, you can only throw every 5th day. And, for these position players that you're getting back, I mean, these are guys that can help really build and make your team well-rounded. And when I look at, like, the 2 packages, let's say here, theoretically, too, and this is just, it could be applicable in different situations, you have a further off package with the Phillies of guys that, again, give you that next wave of talent. But with the Orioles, you get Kjerstad immediately in your lineup right away. You get Norby immediately in your lineup right away. And those are 2 guys that not only help you now just to be better and give people a reason to go watch the team, they're going to be even better down the line. And then whatever that third piece is, whatever else they want to throw in there's a good chance that the third piece could be big league ready pretty soon. So you're not only helping the team for next year and right now, you're also setting it up for success sustainably. And I just feel like that's too good of an opportunity to pass on, especially when you can look at the 2025 rotation and say, you could pencil in Thorpe, you can pencil in Iriarte. I think you could really consider penciling in Schultz, depending on the inning situation on the back half of it. That's a whole different setup and situation. But, I think you can look at everything else and say, hey, this team is already starting to come together a little bit.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, and then when you look at that rotation arm, Grant Taylor's probably ready. Then there's 2 guys that we talk a lot about, and maybe they don't have the higher ceilings, but they definitely have the higher floors, which is Nick Nastrini, Jonathan Cannon, and then you mentioned Mason Adams. That's a nice base to start with in 2 years.
100%. Yeah. And you just have a bunch of options, too. Like if Nastrini's struggling, then you go to Adams. If Adams is struggling, you go to Cannon. If all those guys are throwing pretty well, then you've got a lot of pitching depth. So they've got bodies. And usually these rebuilding teams don't have warm bodies who can throw strikes and get outs. So, I think that's a big part of it. And then the last thing I'll mention is I think people might be surprised at the Eric Fetty return because the fact that he's also only owed $7.5 million next year, I think teams are going to be very excited. So, like, if you don't end up making that move with the Orioles, let's say, to trade a Crochet,
Right.
Eric Fetty might be able to get you one of those guys if packaged with Kopech, where you might be able to, maybe not a Kerstad, but you could get a Norby and some others. And again, that's another guy that ends up helping you sooner rather than later. But I think the Fetty signing was phenomenal. And the way that he's pitching now with a year at $7.5 million next year, like we're watching guys like Kyle Gibson, get $13 million, $12 million, almost half of that for Eric Fetty. Most of these teams are a little bit, nervous to give anything up substantial for a rental pitcher, because how many times is he going to pitch for you? But when you know that you have another year after this one, even if the team fizzles out and doesn't make the playoffs, it becomes a lot more palatable to part with a key piece. And I think that's what's going to happen with Fetty. Again, I think people are going to be surprised at what the White Sox may be able to get with an Eric Fetty.
Yeah, and I get why people are frustrated because the team is rough, but you got to give Chris Getz some credit, right? Like, you got to tip your cap a little bit, right? That's a great signing. There's some other moves that have been good. The Crochet move to being a starter was risky, but it's paying off dividends clearly already. The Kopech going to being a closer, like he struggled a bit lately, but like he still looks way better in the bullpen. There's a lot of pieces that you're going to get value from now that you may not have seen in that same role or style or fit, whatever, before this season. So it's an exciting time. I think this deadline is, nobody wants to hear like let's focus on 2026 necessarily, but like let's focus on 2026. Like this core, like we talk about, like this could be a really good team in a few years and start to, like, it's not this year, it probably isn't next year either, but like beyond that, you're going to start to see signs of a solid core and a really good system, and this deadline can just enhance that even further. That's all I got for you, Aram. We cannot thank you enough. I could talk prospects with you for another 2 hours if I wanted to, but we really appreciate you coming on. This was some great insight and good to just hear kind of all your takes on where the system is at.
No, thanks for having me, and I'm sure we'll be due for a circle back when you guys load up, when the White Sox system loads up and becomes top three, or maybe one of the best in baseball. So I'm excited to see what they do and see how they load up the system. And Jeff, if I'm ever in Charlotte, I've been wanting to catch a game out there. I'll let you know, especially when they load up. I will be out there, so I'll let you know.
I tell you what we'll do, Aram. Not only will we go to Charlotte, but we'll go down the road to Kannapolis, and you'll get to see some good young prospects as well.
Oh, heck yeah. I didn't even know it was that close.
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Oh, that's awesome. All right,
Jeff gets to see both all the time. It's great.
We'll make that happen.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Aram. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.